old exam being held?
May 11th.
May 11th, so you know this, right? And previous long-form essays required students to also be able to discuss point of view, POV. Is that still?
That's actually even more essential to the DBQ. You have to do that for 4 sources.
For 4 sources. Okay. Well, you know, if we think about the previous sources on farming, we do have point of view on those. We know something about who they are, and at least with the first one here on the Black Death, we've got a really particular point of view, right? We've got the King of England, right? So that's really pretty interesting, and there's a lot you can do with the point of view. So those of you who do this in class, how do you get your students to think about a point of view, and then what do they do with it? What do you have them do with, once they identify, okay, he's the King of England, there's a moment here, he's got a purpose, he's got an audience. Where do you go? What do you want him to do beyond that? How does that go? Who's doing the? Yeah, go ahead. How do you deal with this?
Full disclosure, I'm not AP, so don't judge. But
yeah.
I personally think point of view is great for comparison. And we'll compare the points of view. And I usually start out trying to connect it to something current with point of view. I mean, the current political climate is a wonderful way to tackle that energy
Yeah.
and say, okay, you've got 2 different sides here, let's compare them. You know, what are the points on each side? And then have them answer a question. Choose what point of view you agree with.
Okay, so could we say that in this document, that's the ordinance of laborers, clearly this is the king with an ordinance, and so his point of view is clearly there. Could we impute a point of view to the laborers and others who are scurrying around doing things that the king finds really annoying? Right. So that's fair game in a point of view essay, to say that he's talking about them and he's attributing motive and other things to them, and so we could talk about their point of view as well?
That's how you're going to get the kids interested.
Okay.
You can connect it.
Okay. Even within the document here itself.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So that would be a good exercise, and they want 4 documents to do that kind of point of view, and in 40 minutes?
Yeah.
Along with everything else?
It's hard. The kids have a hard time understanding how to express point of view in a paper.
Yeah. Are they usually as obvious as this? The king said?
Yes, they usually are.
They can be? Okay.
That's, one of the things I've been doing recently. Have you seen those Geico commercials that say, "It's just what you do"? You know,
Not yet.
There's a really good one that has Tarzan and his Jane swinging along. Have you seen that one? And he's right in her ear. He's, oh, and she's like, really? In my ear again? All the time. And then he asks, you know, she's asking the monkey where the directions are. Something like, where's the waterfall? And he goes, Tarzan, no way. Tarzan, nowhere to go. No, you don't, she says. And then they start fighting. He swings through the forest again. And the guy commercial says, if you're a couple, you fight. That's just what you do. And that's kind of a cool way to say,
Point of view, huh?
King. What do kings do? Well, they try to keep themselves in control. They try to mollify the aristocracy. They try to make sure they get plenty of tax collection.
Yeah.
Because what's going on? What's he worried
So,
about?
right, so let's talk about that with this particular one right here in 1349. What's the king worried about here? Why is he issuing an executive order? Right?
The whole social system has been, you take out key elements and now, well, okay, I'm the only blacksmith for 30 miles, I can charge what I want.
Yeah, I mean, the other 29 have all died.
Yeah, and so your social structure that keeps the king in power has now been destabilized.
I also think the economy, he's got a certain way he likes it.
Yeah, I mean, I try to imagine what it would be like to live in a world in which, you know, a third to a half of everybody you know dies within 2 years. I mean, it just has to be indiscriminately, yes. Nobody escapes it. Or you do, but by accident.
Well, but we're talking from your political, social leaders, your laborers, your I mean, the whole
Right.
structure. And how do you fill in those key positions?
Yes. So it's mind-boggling to think about. But here you have the king trying to deal with a major disaster, and he's dealing with it by issuing commands.
Yeah, I think it's the old regime too that you mentioned.
Yeah.
That 95% of the people are in agriculture, and so all the wealth is based in that. And you had another little one that you skipped over on your slide that I really liked, was the macro parasites.
Yeah, the
That's the king.
landlord and king.
All of his
Yeah.
wealth is based on 95% of the people's profit.
Yeah, they got to pay some
So
taxes.
when that gets hit, it's right into the coffers quickly.
Yeah.
So I think he's reacting to something, maybe we don't even realize how significant that would be to the political structure,
Mhm.
macro parasites.
Yeah, the little blurb at the top, I probably could have taken that out, but this is the editor. And I don't think in the DBQs for that you have students do, they don't have that the conclusion there. We got the king saying this, but, a vain attempt. Well, so now we know, well, it didn't work, spoiler alert, spoiler alert. But you could probably get your students to figure that out as well, because another thing that I didn't have time to dig out, there's been a lot of work done on price history of Europe and especially of England. And what we know is that after the plague, wages go dramatically up in the 5 decades after the plague. They go dramatically up. And you can see that with just a graph, and that's pretty easy. And you could say, well, you can connect that up with this and see how and why that is. What isn't quite apparent from that is that a number of historians also attribute the plague and the consequences to the economy, raising wages and giving ordinary working people a tremendous amount of leverage over others to one of the death knells to the feudal system that kept people in particular social castes, and they couldn't move. It required mobility for the society to continue to exist at all. Yeah, Kyle?
The Pomerantz book that you mentioned, The Great Divergence.
Yeah.
Does he have that parity argument for wages as
Yes.
well in China? I think I remember that in there.
Yeah.
That we try to make this a European event, but when you compare it across, you kind of have wage parity in China.
Yeah, that's his argument. I should tell you that a fellow by the name of Robert Allen has a new book out on the Industrial Revolution, and he argues that in fact there was wage disparity, that wages in China were less than in England, and he makes a really big deal out of that. And this is a fair, those of you who want to think and talk and write about and teach about the Industrial Revolution, it's a well-written, easily accessible book. Cambridge University Press did it a couple of years ago, but he's making an argument that's in the context of this big argument about commonalities across the world. Pardon? The author's name is Richard Allen, and I'm sure the title of the book is The Industrial Revolution, with a new, a subtitle, The Real Story or something like that. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Let's take a quick look at and talk a little bit about, again, I don't speak French, so Jean de Venette. Anybody speak French? How would you pronounce that? I know Jean Valjean from Les Mis.
I think you're just supposed to remove half the letters and knock the last one. That's the way you go.
Jean de. Yeah, okay. Yeah. So what about point of view on this one? We don't know who this guy is. We could make some assumptions. He has to be literate. He has to be observant. He has to be able to be in some connection with sources of information coming from other parts of Europe. I don't know if there's any evidence in here that would lead me to think that he's a priest. Possibly, merchant, I don't know. Hard to say. But what do you make out of this one? Other than POV and what we can milk that for it.
This one, I believe, is easily understood. If that makes sense. So I think the kids would grasp it. The last paragraph talks about charity beginning to cool. What?
Which one? The paragraph, after the cessation of this epidemic?
Yeah, just like 3 or 4 lines from the bottom. And I think it gives a really good kind of social history of what was going on at the time, description about what daily life would have been like.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because it talks about how everything was dear to everybody. You know, and even though there was probably abundance, like it said, you know, life must have just been pretty crazy.
What did you make out of it's in the middle of that paragraph. Woe is me, the world has not changed for the better, but for the worse. For men were more avaricious and grasping than before. Although there was an abundance of all goods, yet everything was twice as dear. If you connect that up with the previous document, you get a view as to what some of these people look at ordinary laboring people as being like.
He's not a laborer.
No, he's not a laborer. That's, I think we can be quite certain of that. And you think he's accusing laborers of taking advantage of others and being avaricious?
He sees it as avaricious. I think the laborers would see it as, I'm finally getting what I deserve.
Yeah. No, I think that's probably right. So clearly he's not a laborer. He's got to be looking at it from the point of view of an elite, saying, I have to pay to get my roof fixed, and now I've got to pay you twice as much as before. And why is that? Because of your moral failing. You are avaricious, right? I don't know. Right after I would think that, Italy was really hard hit. I don't know which pope it would have been in the 1360s, 1350s, 1360s. No, I don't know either.
There's an addition of a new, small but new group of people that have access to wealth. And maybe this is shocking to this individual. I think this person might be a noble who's seen like Hugo Rich, people that are unwilling to teach proper behavior to their kids, and all they care about is getting rich, and they're probably bouncing around with their new things that they have and acting all hotsy-totsy when they don't have the bloodline. I know I'm reading a lot into it, but I'm kind of thinking that might be a social change that is making this person very uncomfortable.
Well, we do know that the nobility of France did like to have a town house in Paris, right? They did, absolutely.
It's also good to point out what happens to the Jews too.
Yeah, that's pretty in your face, isn't it, as to what happened and why. What would you do with that in class? What would you wait for a student to raise this, or would you prompt them to think?
They would raise it. If they don't, I would bring it.
What do you think students would make out of that comment coming from 1349, which would be what 700 years, 650 years ago?
In Utah, we don't have a long-standing anti-Jewish tradition. There's anti-Semitism is not that common in Utah.
Right.
So most kids in Utah are shocked that there would be a link between bad water, bad air, and Jews. They're not from somewhere where they recognize that sort of anti-Semitism. But you always have to go back and teach the long story, way back.
But most would be
5,000
years.
story to get to this point, and then link it later. But
So that would be contextualization. You could spin off. Pardon?
And synthesis.
And synthesis.
Now you have to add synthesis.
Yes. Yeah.
I don't know what the difference is
To compare
exactly.
between contextualization and synthesis, but they're two separate points.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and their idea of history is rather, their experience is limited. And because we give it to them in chunks, sometimes they don't see that things don't come out of a box.
That's hard. The synthesis part is hard.
The whole question didn't just happen. There's a long history of anti-Semitism that comes before that. They just think it just happened.
Yeah, 20th century Hitler.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then the kids will be like, why did everybody hate the Jews?
You gotta do the whole story, you gotta be ready for that.
Yeah.
If you're doing this lesson, you better have your
That's
Jewish
Ducks in a
history
row.
ready to go, yeah.
Yep. I've got another set of images up here for our art history friends. Do you, when you do art history, do you we could have a long discussion, what is art, what is history? But do you take art history to be, or art to be images of any kind? Is it always fine art? We've got Bruegel over here, by the way. Here's that same image. So how do you use images in art?
They have to be able to make social, political, and economic connections to the world the art was produced.
They do. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's not the images as image. It's image in context.
Quite frankly, if I didn't have to teach that, I wouldn't be here today. Because I got commissions that are sitting back in the studio, but I have to know enough to get them to understand this art piece is saying this for this bias to this group of people coming out of this kind of a problem.
Okay, so it sounds like then for art history, you have to do with images what the historians have to do with maps and written
Yes.
documents. Is that right?
Yes, exactly.
And so so are they given the same kind of a prompt, 1, 2, or 3 images, and
They may be given 2 images to do a contrasting essay.
Uh-huh.
But most often they will, here's the image, what is the context, what is the content, how is the iconography used to develop that message?
so they have to know something about all of those techniques to be. Do they make a guess as to the time period and
No,
place?
they have to know the date.
They have to know it.
They have to know the date. The date, the artist, who commissioned
can't-
the piece, who was it designed for, what was the reason for producing the piece, what are all those connections?
So none of these more or less folkish kinds of images are much going to be used then for you.
That you have on the screen, we might use Peter Bruegel.
Yeah.
We might use the skeletons as we talk about the Black Death.
Yeah, up
I
there.
would do the illustration from the Moralizing Bible. No, up above you.
Above
Right
this
there.
one? Yep.
The one in the middle on the third is a detail from a painting, but I can't remember which
Which one? This one?
one.
Yeah.
I don't remember.
So do your students, when they take the AP art history, are they surprised like the students doing history? They don't know what's going to be in there? Are they given, like, out of these 100 images that's going to be there, or do they?
Have 250 images they have to know all of that for, and it's global. So it's Americas, it's India, it's Africa, it's Central Asia, it's China, it's Pacific, it's Europe,
Okay.
and I don't remember.
And are these selected to represent different time periods and different traditions?
So like,
Okay.
we gotta know Machu Picchu, we gotta know
Okay.
Dawn, and we gotta know, what is it? Angkor Wat, and the Forbidden City, and then all of the pieces that go in between.
Go in between. Okay. Wow.
Yeah, we got hit by a brick last year. They rewrote the curriculum for last year and implemented it last year, and we went from being very Eurocentric to global.
Yeah.
And we're all scrambling to get the global.
Okay. Well, there'll be some more images on the global coming up after lunch. We'll do the Columbian Exchange briefly, and then we'll do Zheng He and his voyages and Columbus.
So lunch isn't quite here yet, if you
Oh.
wanna go for a few more.
Oh, it's not. Are we going to have somebody?
Being delivered downstairs.
Okay. So let's do. We can do. We can do the Columbian Exchange. I think. So somebody will come and yell at us when we're up and ready to go. Okay. All right. Am I in your, you trying to get the images there? Can you get the lights again? There we go. Okay. So, again, this is part of the story of, and the narrative that we put together as to how did the world get to be the way it is. And of course, one of the strongest narratives of that is the voyages of exploration, right? Leading, Da Gama and others trying to get to Asia, and then Columbus going west to get east, and all of that. And that's usually, if you get, and see, we got early voyages of discovery, and nearly all of these maps that show this are Mercator projections, which have their own issues, but they all have, they're all centered on Greenwich, England, right, which was only decided in the 19th century. And then the voyages, some of them have arrows that are pointing out. And so a map like this of the voyages of discovery gives us the subliminal message that the making of the world after 1492 is a result of the actions and agencies of Europeans going out and discovering the world. And yeah, sponsoring nations, Portugal, Spain, England, France, and all of that. And the argument that those of us who are doing world history, I think most of us now would do, is that this moment and what follows from it, which is indeed Europeans and their sailing vessels knitting the world together, is not necessarily a necessary outcome of the brilliance and courage of Europeans to take these horrific and scary voyages, but it is contingent. It's contingent upon choices and decisions that were made elsewhere in the world, having nothing to do with them, and leaving a world, the ocean ways, open to them on an open platter. And that has to do with the stories of this rather extraordinary moment in Chinese and then ultimately world history of the voyages in the early 1400s of the Chinese Admiral Zheng He. And I want to take just a couple of minutes to talk about that. So I'm going to zip through.
That's how you say his name? Zheng He?
Yeah. Yep. The voyages of Zheng He. I have to apologize to my students. I'll give you, the Chinese writing system, we could go down there and talk with these folks, is in pictographs and ideographs where you can't tell how it's pronounced by looking at it. So we have to take the sounds and put it into the 26 letters of the alphabet. And there have been a number of ways to do this. And the latest one can be the most confusing. So ZH is J, Zheng. You'll find an X sometimes, and that's pronounced Xia. And a Q, the doggone Q, Qin Shi Huangdi, the first emperor, it's pronounced Qin. Anyway, so, and I apologize, and I'm sorry, and if they asked me, I never would have done it this way, but this is what we got. So yeah, Zheng He. That's who we got. Zheng He. And by the way, I told Janet that we'll get all of these images and the PowerPoint available to Luciano, and along with the materials. So if you like these images and you want to use them, you go ahead and they're yours. So the short story of these voyages is that in the early 1400s, a new young emperor of China chose to create the largest armada the world had seen for a number of reasons. One is he probably came to the throne as a result of killing his nephew who had been placed on the throne. So he was a usurper. And you don't want to be an emperor known as a usurper. So he's going to try to chase him down. He was also very activist, and he wanted to show the flag that after we've gotten rid of the damn Mongols, is there anybody else in the world out there who can challenge the glory and power of the great Ming Empire? And so he ordered these vessels built and this armada. And so from 1402 to 1405, there was a rush of shipbuilding on China's southeast coast. Much of the southeast coast was in fact deforested to build these ships. 120 or so ships were built. And over the next 20 years or so, until 1433, there were 7 of these voyages of Zheng He, heading out into the South Oceans and then mostly heading through the Straits of Malacca into the Indian Ocean, into the Red Sea and Arabia, and down to the east coast of Africa. There's a number of elements and things that happened here. The Chinese, the Ming, used this to establish their superiority over all of the known world, and brought back ambassadors from all these places, and including Korea and Japan and the kingdoms of Southeast Asia. They would come back and spend a year in the capital city in Beijing, which was constructed by this guy as well. So the current imperial city in Beijing was constructed in the early 1400s along the same time. I don't have any images of this, but you just Google Imperial Palace, and that's what was built in 1400. And they're brought back to say, we are the most powerful force on earth. Look at this Imperial Palace. Isn't that proof enough? So they're doing that. They're creating a world with China at the center. They are collecting botanical supplies and examples all around the world and bringing it back to the gardens. They're collecting animals of all different kinds and bringing them back. They're collecting giraffes. We've got some pretty interesting images of giraffes. They're collecting no rhinoceros. The rhinoceros is kind of difficult to control, right? You got other things. But so there's, like the Europeans did in the 19th century with botanical gardens and all their collecting of resources as well, that the Chinese were doing. The other thing the Chinese did, which is not often part of the story, but they used their military power on these armadas to depose rulers who were not friendly to them, and to put rulers in place who were friendly to them. You know, an imperialist action. They got rid of the leader of this little trading town of Malacca, dispatched him, and put in power somebody who was much more friendly to the Chinese. And then in the part of the world that we now call Sri Lanka, they did the same thing to the king of Sri Lanka, got rid of him, put in somebody more favorable to him there. So they were not afraid to use military power to get their way. But ultimately what they discovered is that there really was no military force out there that posed any threat to them whatsoever. Mostly what we know, and this is work that people on the Indian Ocean trading circuits have done, mostly the traders, the maritime traders in the Indian Ocean, were peaceful traders who thought that the way trade worked is, you've got something I want, I've got something you want, I give you that, we agree on that, we shake hands, yeah, then I phone for $1. But got a deal, go away, right? Trade was on the basis of peace, and people didn't use arms to do that. So there's a lot of ships out here, but they're trade, and this is the engine of much of the exchange of, the previous map of those 8 world circuits of trade is being generated by all this activity in the South. Now, I want to point out one other thing while I'm looking at this in terms of contemporary stuff. These voyages are the basis for China's current claims to, let's see, we've got Taiwan here, we've got the Philippines here, Indonesia here. So this China currently has drawn what they call the 9-dashed line in the South China Sea. And they claim this, and this is where they are building those islands in the South China Sea. It's rather specific, and that's their claim, historic claim, to that being their territory. They brought that, the Philippines brought a claim against them 2 or 3 years ago to the International Court of Arbitration. I forgot the exact name. And the International Court rendered a decision in 2015 that said, China, you have no basis for claims for this as being your territory. But they're doing it anyway. Just to tell you where they're going. So the Chinese have this entire space all the way over to the east coast of Africa under their control. Now, here's another image of that with the various trade circles and cycles. This comes from an article in the Journal of World History that, again, if you can get it, take a look at it. The article is pretty interesting.
Where do we get the information again about these voyages? Because they didn't know about it for a while.
I'm gonna get to that at the very end, and it's sort of good news and bad news. But that's the end. We'll get there. So this is, you know, all dominated by Chinese military power in the 1400s, from 1405 to 1433, and then some interesting things happen in 1433. For a set of reasons that have to do with court politics in China and the death of the emperor who put these voyages out there, there was a struggle in the Chinese court between those who were Confucian fundamentalists who thought that all energy and time and resources ought to be lavished on creating China as the most agriculturally self-sustainable empire. And so, you know, getting back to that agriculture story, there was another group that had supported the voyages. These were merchants, they were eunuchs, and they were a few other things, and they lost out. And so the new regime in 1434, 1435 simply ordered all the navy back into port, refused to allow it to go, allowed the ships to rot, collected all the documents on these voyages and burned them. That's getting to the question of what do we know and how do we know about that. So this is that moment. This is that contingency, and I want to just take this out a little bit. Until 1433, China had the largest navy in the world in the Indian Ocean. For reasons that had nothing to do with anything else, but had to do with the politics within China, they choose to withdraw their navy from the Indian Ocean. And the Indian Ocean is gone the Chinese Navy is gone in 1433. Now, I've got up here another date, because in the 1415, the guy who becomes known as Henry the Navigator begins trying to figure out how to get to Asia. He gets his caravels, he learns how to do some blue water sailing, and starts heading down the coast of Africa. And there's some interesting stories about what's going on and what the Portuguese are doing here, especially with the Cape Verde Islands up there and other things. But by 1434, the Portuguese they've only gotten to the west coast of Africa. They're not even in the Gold Coast or any of the other slaving parts. They're just up here. China was here, 1433, they remove it. Diaz begins to continue to move down, and Portuguese get to what becomes the Cape of Good Hope by 1488. We know what happens in 1492, Columbus sails that way. The Portuguese say, get your ass in there, among other things. Now, the caravels that the Portuguese had were the same size and nature of the Santa Maria, what are they? There you go. You all know that. I only know some of them. But they're basically the same thing. So I'm going to give you an image or two that will show you what the Chinese Admiralty ships look like compared to the ones that Diaz and then Columbus are sailing. And then we can think about what would happen if they met down here or up here. This is the treasure ship of the Chinese Admiral Zheng He, and here is a Portuguese caravel. Actually, I think that's a Santa Maria. Okay, so these vessels are 400 feet long, 150 feet wide. The masts, this one is showing them with the yellow masts. The masts are about 150 feet high. There are 9 masts. The other descriptions that we have of them is that the sails were made out of red silk. So if you think of red silk. And this is at the head of a fleet of 120 other vessels, 27,000 sailors, marines, and others. And there might have been 3 of these vessels. Admiral Zheng He is on this one. And some of the other vessels, they had marines. Marines are used for landing and then getting on, and they had horses, they had cavalry, they got the military might. And I want you to also get into the whole section of Chinese shipbuilding. This ship is made with watertight compartments. The whole hull is made out of watertight compartments. Almost there, Luciano. We're almost on our way. But if you look back here, it's not immediately obvious what's behind door 3. But anybody want to take a guess what the Chinese have that can poke out here? Cannons. Cannons. So that navy is withdrawn and all of its military power, allowing the Portuguese to sail around the Cape of Good Hope, and then in 1498 to sail to Calicut in India, and then into the South China Sea, opening the way first for the Portuguese, then the English come, the next wave, and then the French, and then others as well. So this Europe at the center, all these voyages of discovery really have to be put into the context of the contingency that they were possible only because of the decisions made by the Chinese in 1434. If not, the Europeans would not have had what turned out to be true. They would not have had a global monopoly on sailing ships and knitting together the world in the 1540s, 30s, and 40s. There could have been another world. There was nothing that would have prevented the Chinese, who had the capability of sailing around the Cape of Good Hope into and through the Straits of Malacca, and saying, imagine 120 ships with the with the Admiral's flagship heading through there. Okay, now I'm going to get to the question. Let's see. I forgot your name. Lindley. Okay. Are we going to do a DBQ workshop based on this? No. Why not? Sources. This is a collection. Oh, you can't see this very well. The Chinese, this was put together and published, I think, in 2011 or 2012. There is a Chinese collection of sources about Zheng He's voyages, but there's none of them have been translated. There's a couple of books on Zheng He that are pretty good and use other sources, but mostly some of these are Chinese secondary sources. This is a pretty famous one, Luis Lavazas, who did this one 10, 12 years or so ago. It's very readable and you can use it. This is his name Dreyer is well chosen. It's a Dreyer view of everything else. He's from the University of Minnesota. Good colleague, good friend. He knows what he's doing. But as far as I know, there's nothing like the sources that I've been able to give you for these other things to think about Zheng He and this incredible turning point in world history that makes it possible for Portuguese and Spanish to circumnavigate the globe.
Where did they find what they had,
Yeah,
though?
we found some documents. We found archaeological evidence. The harbors where they were built have been put together and excavated. And China has, in 2025, it was the 600th anniversary. And so it was a huge effort in 25 to gather everything that they could and begin putting it together, and that's what's in here. But we're on the edge of having the documents.
Did they find a rudder somewhere in one of the villages that actually built the rudders and they buried it so it couldn't get destroyed?
I don't remember that.
I don't know if
Possibly.
that's true or if that's in Menzies.
Oh, yeah, don't get me on Menzies.
31, isn't it?
Yeah.
20.
Yeah, the year the Chinese discovered America. You know, not just simply that he takes all of that and spins a tale out of virtually nothing. He got a $500,000 advance for that book.
That's the frustrating.
I am just that just annoys the crap out of me. You know? Anyway, so no DBQ workshop, time for lunch. We can talk about this and other things later as well. We got to come back to a couple of things. Yes. All right.